At his coronation, he made an important modification to his oath, swearing to respect the liberties of the people only insofar as they did not clash with the prerogative of the crown. He believed that, in the last resort, God had made him sole judge of the rights and interests of his subjects. It was by no means an ignoble belief. The text for the sermon preached at his coronation, a text which he must surely have approved, was, "Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life." Nothing could have better expressed his belief that the whole of his mortal life was dedicated to the right exercise of his kingly office. In the first winter of the Civil War, when the king still had every reason to expect a rapid victory, he wrote in a private letter that he meant to be either a glorious king or a patient martyr. This was a clear statement that he would admit neither surrender nor compromise as a way out of the war. Either he would have a complete victory, or he would fight to the last, whatever the consequences, sooner than abandon what he believed to be his sacred duty. This intransigence of the king, an intransigence springing from what was essentially a religious conception of his office, was the most important single factor in bringing him to his tragic end. It had been clear before Queen Elizabeth I died that the struggle for power between the monarch and Parliament could not long be postponed. All over Europe during this century of decision, monarchs sought to strengthen and centralize their power in order to create efficient modern states. The cumbrous local and representative institutions which had grown up during the Middle Ages were being challenged and destroyed. But a few of these institutions, of which the English Parliament was one, had as much resilience and modernity as the sovereign, and had, moreover, a dangerous power over him, because they were the principal source through which he obtained money. Elizabeth, by dexterous management of her parliaments, and by a subtle judgment of popular reactions, had successfully maintained the authority of the crown. King James I never had the old Queen's infallible popular touch, and in the course of his reign he gradually allowed Elizabeth's clever custom of managing Parliament through court officials, whose task it was to organize the presentations of the royal policy to their fellow members, government spokesmen, as we should say, to fall into disuse. When King Charles ascended the throne in March 1625, it was clear that the repeated deadlocks between king and Parliament could not continue for much longer. One or other would have to find means to prevail. As the situation stood, the king's policy was constantly blocked by Parliament's refusal to vote supplies, but Parliament had not yet gained the power to initiate policy itself, still less the power to force its wishes on the king. The king stood for the authoritarian solution of this problem by freeing himself from financial dependence on Parliament and reducing it to the position of an advisory council. Parliament, or rather its more dynamic leaders, stood for a solution by which they would themselves gain a say in the nomination of the king's councillors and the framing of his policy. Both parties believed that their point of view was justified by the ancient law and practice of England, and both were wrong. King and Parliament were in fact facing a new situation, brought about by the social and economic changes of the last century, which neither of them fully understood. No man called to the government of England in 1625 would have had an easy task, but neither civil war in the country nor the death of the king was inevitable. The contests might have been settled by argument rather than by arms. Even if the tension led to war, there was no need for the war to end in the sacrifice of the king. It was Charles's at once remarkable and tragic character, an exceptional firmness of purpose, allied with an exceptional infirmity of judgment, which led to the final tragedy. At the time of his accession, he was in his 25th year, a small, well-made, sturdy young man whose considerable self-possession masked a natural shyness, betrayed only by a slight stammer. As a child, he'd been sickly, slow in walking and speaking, but his health had stabilized as he grew up, and although he was very small, an inch or so above 5 feet, he was strong, agile, a graceful dancer, and a fine horseman.